Hello, hello. You are listening to the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast, and if you are, I thank you very much. I'm your host, Neil Horowitz. You can find me on Twitter at NJH287, also on LinkedIn, where I post more content. The website for the podcast and blog is dsmsports.net, and of course, check out the podcast, follow along, subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. What a tremendous show for you guys today. I just cannot recommend this one enough. You're going to want to take some notes. You're going to listen to it multiple times. It will change the way you think about content strategy, about social media, about strategy in the space overall when it comes to creative on these platforms. You're going to be hearing from Jonah Ballow. He is the founder and head of content strategy and production at Heartland Group. They are one of the best agencies out there, working with a ton of major brands, teams, leagues, athletes, consumer brands, businesses, just doing a ton of great work. And with Jonah, we talk about Heartland Group, as well as his time with the New York Knicks and Minnesota Timberwolves, among other topics. So stick around for that because, again, it is just so good. But before we get to my conversation with Jonah, we have not a helpful tool per se, but an app to keep an eye on and really more of what the app says about consumer behavior. And that app is called Lock It. It has been at the top of the iOS App Store for free apps really throughout 2022 so far. And as I'm talking to you, it's mid-January 2022, and Lock It continues to be number one on the charts, just gaining tons of installs every day. And essentially what it is, you can look it up, obviously, in the App Store on the web, and it is an app that allows you to send photos to your friends, best friends, that will appear in a widget on their iPhone home screen. It's kind of like Snapchat. If Snapchat had a widget on your iOS home screen where you could send photos to that group and send photos back to other good friends. Now, it's a very early on app, so more features will be added. But when it comes to these emerging apps, emerging platforms, the key is to look at what consumer behavior or what new feature, what new technology piece is it really exploiting. In this case, it's multiple things. First off is, of course, the ability to communicate with close friend groups, with best friends, kind of like what Snapchat was founded upon. Not trying to broadcast to the whole world, but really to message and send content, send fun photos and videos to your best friends. And also the idea of the widget on the home screen in this case. That's a very important place to be, obviously. People look at their home screen, depending on how active you are with your iPhone, hundreds, if not thousands of times every week, every day. And to be able to have an app that is speaking to you on there, showing you photos of your friends, is a pretty powerful thing. So as these widgets come about, should your app, should your team app or league app or brand app have a creative widget that can allow people to do things that they want to do, whether that is sending photos to good friends, seeing photos from you, seeing score updates, obviously is a big one that we're seeing with widgets right now. But it just gets you thinking for sure. And I won't spend too much more time because I just recommend downloading the app and checking it out and really thinking about what behaviors that it says about consumers, how they're engaging with each other, how they're communicating, what it says about how they want to use their devices, and what you can take to that with your own platforms, with your own organization, with your own behavior and strategy on social media. So check it out. Again, not exactly a helpful tool, but a very thought-provoking app that is jumping up the charts in 2022 so far. Again, it's called Lock It, just like you wear over your neck, Lock It. And check it out on the App Store. But more importantly, stick around because just a fantastic conversation. I cannot recommend this one enough. Again, with Jonah Ballow of Heartland Group. Right back with this episode's guest, and I am so excited to talk to him. I was telling him offline, the conversation has been a long time coming. I'm joined on the podcast today by Jonah Ballow. He is the founder and head of content strategy and production for the Heartland Group. They're doing amazing work. You've probably seen it, even if you don't know it. And welcome to the podcast today, Jonah.
Thanks so much, Neil. Really appreciate it. I've been excited about this as well. So really interested and excited, to talk with you and cover a variety of topics.
We are going to geek out so much on social, digital media, and sports, and I cannot be more excited. It's a great way to kick off 2022, but this will last for the whole year and then some. Hopefully, social media won't change too much, but it probably will. But Jonah, you have a super impressive background already in your career. Tell us about your career path, how you got started in this crazy space, the various stops along the way, and how you have made the jump to Heartland Group, and of course, any tips for folks that want to work in your space.
Yeah, I'll try to make a long story short because it certainly wasn't your traditional route to where I'm at now, which I think it's something that I'm really actually proud of, and I've told a lot of students or people, younger people, now that I'm an old guy, I can pass on some hopeful wisdom to some people, and saying that you're never stuck in one spot. And I think that's really important. And where I started was at the University of Kansas. I grew up in Colorado, in a suburb about 20 minutes outside Denver. And when I went to the University of Kansas, obviously a college basketball powerhouse. And my main goal was to be on the radio and do play-by-play for sports, basketball primarily, or have my own talk show and become the next Howard Stern. So as you can see, didn't hit both those goals at that time at the University of Kansas, but I got a lot of experience. And really what was interesting at the point that I was there is in 2000 to 2004, in journalism school, they were beginning to teach it and start to approach the idea of converged journalism. How do we tell stories online? And it really attracted to me. I've always been kind of interested in technology, interested in the different mediums and the way to present them to an audience. So I started learning, how to build web pages, why a story online would be treated differently than a newspaper or radio or TV, and like how to bring those elements together and not just copy and paste, right? And it was the very beginning stages of all that, prior to social media. And so kind of cut my teeth in all different aspects of journalism, wrote for the school paper, did a little play-by-play courtside for, Kansas basketball, which I still to this day think is probably going to be my career highlight, because I don't know how you beat that. Yeah. When Kansas was vying for national championships, and I'm there courtside calling a game on live radio with Kansas versus Iowa State in a jam-packed Allen Fieldhouse was certainly a bucket list item for me. So I did that for a while, and coming out of college, if you want to go play-by-play, it's a difficult route. A lot of people want to do that job, and you have to go to a small town, or unless you're incredibly impressive straight out of the gate in college, which I was not. It's a long road, and it's a difficult one. And I didn't know necessarily if I wanted to go that path. But I got into radio, and I started creating, content in the radio world and with sports talk radio. So I became a producer in Lawrence, Kansas, and in Kansas City. I started working at a station called 610 Sports, which is still one of the bigger stations there today. And that place allowed me to kind of grow my on-air voice and learn radio in and outs of producing segments behind the glass, and getting a feel for a broadcast style of how I would approach it on air. And so I got a lot of opportunities there, covering events, Kansas City Chiefs, Kansas basketball, all that good stuff in the Midwest, and doing, updates on the air. Yeah. And basically, at that time with the radio, I really thought that was going to be my career medium. And then, radio stations started having their own websites, and 610 Sports launched theirs. And I really got involved with how do we bring the on-air content? Because in my head, I'm like, well, if you don't hear the bits that we were doing on a morning drive show, you miss it. Yeah. You're never going to hear it. Like, where do you get this content? And the on-demand thing really clicked with me of how to grow an audience that existed beyond 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. for that morning show. And, a man named Damon Amendolara was the host of that show. He's actually on CBS Radio now, and one of my best friends. He was the host, and he was young like me at the time, and, was fully involved in how do we get, interesting things on the website? How do we do a fan bracket for March Madness where the fans can get involved and be intertwined into the content that he brings on air? So it was great for those years that I was there. And then eventually, people in radio will know, running the board is sort of a technical job that I took a lot of the times, because, you're making little money or trying to get as much experience as possible. But I would, run the board for, a Kansas City Royals game or some of these morning shows. And basically you're just bringing up local, commercials, and, your job is there to be for 8 hours, but it's honestly a very, very boring position to be in. So I would bring my laptop, and I started teaching myself HTML and how to build websites and doing Photoshop. Wow. And I say that because, a lot of times I think there's opportunities within the opportunity, and I was able to grow my experience from a technical standpoint And then that led to an opportunity with the Minnesota Timberwolves. And at the time in the NBA, they only had two, what I would say, quote unquote, team reporters within the 30 teams. Mm-hmm. And the guy that was at the Minnesota Timberwolves, Mike Trudell, he ended up taking a job with the Lakers. Yeah. And then I applied for the job at the Timberwolves. And that job involved everything. Like, I became more of an on-air voice, a personality, a reporter for the team that would be inside, embedded, bringing you the latest scoops, day-to-day content, and also updating the website. So it'd be a one-man band pretty much, like, where I would be able to do everything, do some audio. And then we hired a videographer, and I started doing some on-air camera work and developed that part of, my capabilities. And I started to see how fans really got interested in that, even though Minnesota was terrible during the time that I was there. When Ricky Rubio came over, I was there when he landed on U.S. soil. I pushed our PR team and our marketing team to let me be the first guy to talk to him. I'm like, why wouldn't we own that content? So a lot of learnings there, and I would say a smaller team, smaller market. And then, the New York Knicks wanted to, expand their content on their platforms, and they saw what I was doing with a smaller market team and was really interested in all the hats that I could wear. So I made that leap to Madison Square Garden, and for 6 years, again, was an on-air personality for the Knicks, but ran the digital department. And that was really when social media exploded. That's when all the different, distribution opportunities became available to, the online audience, and the NBA really, really, really dove into that side of their business. And so, did that for 6 years. And then I decided, as awesome of a job as that was, traveling with a team on the plane, doing all that great stuff, being at all-star games, MSG, it sucks your life away, and it's hard sometimes to take a step back and be like, well, where do I go next? And it just turned out where I had this opportunity to go to a marketing agency in New York City. And I took the leap of faith and said, let's try something completely new. I didn't have any agency experience. Mine was mostly built broadcast, online content, but Heath Steckler, who was there, and Elliot Gerard was the creative director there. Elliot, I actually hired him to do a lot of the creative work when I was at the Knicks. And so he was like, you got to come over, you got to do that. And I was like, wow, I was thinking more like going to Bleacher Report or ESPN or something like that, or maybe another team or the NBA, the league. And I really found it interesting because the way we were built was kind of a startup within a very large agency. And MKTG is primarily, experiential agency, but we were able to do digital content. And there, for 2 years, I was able to really expand out to directing, producing video content for Fortune 500 companies on a much larger scale, and take a step behind, the lens, and really cut my teeth in that world, as opposed to being in front of the camera. But it was the same sort of, things that I was doing on the air in 610 Sports in Kansas City, to the Minnesota Timberwolves, to the New York Knicks, all the things that I learned and applied, at those different positions really worked well at the agency of bringing content to life. And it's really basic, right? If you deliver good content, whether it's for a brand, commercial, social media, digital content, if it's a team, a league, a brand, those same thought processes and capabilities and skill sets are going to lead to good work and good opportunities. So, the pandemic hit, I was at MKTG and working with those two guys, and we were part of the layoffs that happened because of COVID, but it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. And we took the leap of faith to join forces together. After some time, I took away to kind of do some consulting and some work outside of Heartland. And then it just made sense, after a while, almost a year, I guess, away from the agency, and decided to work with those guys and join forces again of something that, we discussed of how we could really bring our sort of lens, our sort of approach, unique, creative way of delivering content to clients through our own agency, and it's been tremendously rewarding so far. So I know I said long story short, but it turned out to be a long story. So hopefully that kind of gives a little bit of a snapshot into my career path.
No, I love it. There are so many different directions we can go, and you're almost like the Forrest Gump of social media and sports, where you kind of been at these inflection points throughout your career, where the intersection of audio and of course the internet coming about there, and how do you make something that's meant to be consumed live also live on in all other ways. Then you go to the T-Wolves and this idea of team produced content. Hey, we can help tell our own stories. We can be the ones to introduce Ricky Rubio instead of the local beat reporter. And so I love that as well. And then going to the Knicks and really elevating that even more, and also you picking up all those skills along the way of all of a sudden now I think every social media person can relate just about is, hey, yeah, I might have started out doing this and this, but now I've also added on this, and this, because we have to keep up and to be there as hopefully resources came about as well. And then even going to the agency side and the differences there, working with different brands and having to, win clients over and balancing their wants and needs with what will work best. Like, Jonah, my head's exploding because there's so many different ways we can go here, but I love it. And I enjoyed hearing the story and stops along the way. But let's talk about those earlier days when, for you, like, did it just sort of happen organically where, you were always kind of there, part of the content, in front of the camera oftentimes with the Knicks, with the Timberwolves, and, you still had that background in radio and kind of being on the mic, so to speak. So like was it just sort of organic that, hey, yeah, I might be more focused on, the storytelling, the writing, the being in front of the camera, but now I'm also creating websites, creating web content, creating video content, and I'm learning all these other skills along the way. And was there that sort of intersection on the graph where one started to take more time and outweigh the other, or was it always just you're going to be a jack of all trades and no time for sleep?
Yeah, I have this sort of problem where I want to do everything. And I've gotten better over time and age of trying to hone in on what I can do and focus on an area. But really, I've always felt this way when I was in radio, that to be a good host, you kind of need to know what happens on the technical side of it. Or to be a good on-camera personality, you need to know kind of what's going on so that you can, there's going to be the inevitable situation where things just don't go right. And you have to be able to break out of whatever you thought was planned, whatever happens on an interview, whatever happens with your videographer. If he's delayed in setting up the camera, or the camera isn't working, and you got to kind of BS with your, the person you're interviewing, or a celebrity, or a player. And I just felt like there was a lot of skills that kind of worked well together. And I liked all of it. I liked doing the different things, and I felt more well-rounded. I didn't necessarily think that I would end up at where I'm at now, but I knew that if I had all these skills under my belt, it was going to be very difficult, either for an organization to potentially get rid of me, or a organization not to hire me. When I applied for the job at MSG, I looked at the guy who was hiring me and said, what else would you need from one employee? And it's not being like cocky. It's just, I'm delivering a confidence of my skills that I can hopefully deliver everything. Now, I think we're at a point, and I should say this too, where I think there's too much asked of the people running social in sports. If you follow that industry, you're starting to see a lot of those people are getting burnt out. Yes. They're leaving. They're not paid well enough. The idea that you're doing something very cool, very unique that most people don't get to do, and they love to get there. But at the end of the day, it is a job. And when you do something over and over and over and over again, the shine does wear off. And it did for me at some point, right? It was just too much. And I also just wanted something for a change. But I really, along the road to that, and I wouldn't change anything that I did, was that I knew if I could gather all these skills, it would help me either be a good boss for those people who were going to do that, or to be a better personality on air, or to be better at how do I deliver this content on a site if I know the back end structure of it and the limitations of what the technology can do and can't do. What is better for audio? What's better for video? What is the length? What's the time? All these things that go into it. I really, really think it was beneficial for me moving forward. And now more of a leadership role, more of a, big picture, where does our agency go? Where do we think about delivering content, how we think about content, how we talk to our clients? All these things have come together for me. And I feel like it's a wealth of experience, and I can talk a lot of the different areas to it. And it's just helped in a tremendous way. So, I love gathering the information, and, I'm a nerd at heart too. So I like the tech stuff as well. So it's been a fun process this far.
No, and having that skill, that all that skill set, but certainly as we're coming up, that the skills to know both sort of the front end and back end, so to speak, of both sides of the camera, both sides of the story. You look at like let's say the Tom Rinaldis of the world, or to a lesser extent the Adam Schefters and Wojs, but the ones we look at them and then we say they are producing content. They are not even necessarily producing content. They are hosting content. They're writing stories. They're telling stories orally, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have other people that are producing it, editing it, maybe cutting it for social, figuring out different ways to tell that story and repackaging it, and tracking the data for it and all that as well. So like we still have this sort of dichotomy, and it's a very blurred spectrum now, where some people are strictly on the on-camera talent, and they are writing. People that are strictly behind the camera. We have people that are sort of in between. Of like everyone's a content creator now, because we walk around with cameras in our pockets, of course,
right?
With so much power. So like, what's that sort of delineation between, like, especially probably as you were ascending with the Knicks, of okay, I'm on the camera, I'm producing a lot of content myself, I'm writing the stories, I'm pushing record and then standing in front of it, perhaps oftentimes, which I think a lot of us have been there. I've been there. And so like, what happens as you did you become more of a social media person and director of social media there, or were you more still this, I'm the talent for the Knicks and I do this because no one else can?
No, I became the director of digital. So we brought in a world-class videographer who traveled with me, and he really took a lot of the load in terms of the video content creation, and somebody that I trusted to also bring ideas to the table and collaborate with me. We were a 2-man band on the road. A lot of times I'd be, telling him these ideas that I want to do, and he'd figure out a way to bring it to life on the edit or the shoot. And that really helped. So, eventually I kind of morphed a little bit more into the big picture, directing of the digital. We had somebody who's going to run our social channels. And I would also run my own personal channel, which was, I thought, important to have somewhat of a face behind the logo.
Yeah.
And that fans can know that the way I looked at my position at the Knicks, and even the Timberwolves, but even more so with the Knicks, was that I was just lucky enough to be there, and I want to be a conduit to the fans. Yeah. So often I would ask them, what do you guys want to hear from Kristaps Porzingis at practice? I'll ask him, right? And like, I always felt like if you're a diehard fan, where else are you going to get that? The New York Post, the Daily News, they're not going to go to their fans and ask them, like, what do you guys want to hear about? Or get a little bit more of a personality from the players.
You are the eyes and ears. You're their eyes and ears, because they can't be there, you can. And so they can live vicariously through you.
So that's how I kind of viewed my role, less of a talking to as a talking with.
Yeah.
And so that's how it was for me. And yes, it morphed way more into the social digital landscape. And then, we had a full marketing team that was involved in the season ticket collateral, the marketing campaigns, things of that nature. A lot of those got blurred though, and it was a challenge at times. And I think teams are trying to figure out, how their departments should be organized or structured. I think social is its own beast. It should be definitely its own thing. But I would be lying if I said it wasn't stressful kind of playing all the hats. but I would also say that I'm a little bit to blame for that stress because I took on everything. And I wanted to kind of control everything. And looking back at it, that would be one thing I would go back and change, is try to develop a team, get more people involved in the creation of the content. But we were in the embryonic stages of a social and digital and how we were going to deliver it. And it was kind of a test and learn as you go. But yeah, that was my goal was to really just have an onslaught of Knicks digital content that if you're a fan, you were going to get everything. And I did funny segments where I'd ask quick hitters, and I would do, bits with Ron Baker about his kids book that he wrote, and Christmas, what the guys were going to do for Christmas. So hopefully my goal was, listen, if the team's good or bad, you're going to like the guys on the team. Yeah. And it's going to be less, because you can't really bank on the performance on the court or the field. It's just not in your control. And if you're out of the playoff race in January, there's a lot of time there. And as a marketing individual, I would say, even though my background wasn't necessarily from a scholastic standpoint, marketing was more journalism, but like an editorial perspective, like you have to get people to buy into the product, buy into the team. And if there's some buy-in and they're interesting and entertaining, then you have them. And then, my goal is to just grow those viewers, grow that audience. And listen, I wish those teams would have had more buy-in to owning their own content, because I think that is also very lucrative. And I just don't think they were at a point to do that yet, because MSG Network's a huge beast for them, right? They have to have the New York Post. They have to have the Daily News. So, but I really thought they could have owned it. They could have had a whole podcast network. They could have had a whole video network, and they could have broke all the news on their own channels, and sponsorship dollars would have came in. And that was another thing, Neil, that really changed my role to the last 3-4 years at the Knicks. The Timberwolves didn't have the sponsorship dollars allocated directly to digital. The Knicks started to, and I started to really work with the sales team on developing content specific for brands. And this is kind of where the bridge happened, where I was able to make that leap to the agency life, because I was selling in content that was, built for the New York Lottery. Where the players would talk about the numbers they would wear on their chest and the meaning behind that. And it was presented by New York Lottery. So things that weren't just a logo slap, that were actually integrated into it. The players talking about what's their necessary travel items, and it was presented by Amtrak. And we got video of us taking the train to Washington, D.C. for a game. So that was the B-roll. So that's kind of how the game kind of changed while I was in it. And I just had to kind of roll as we went and find new and innovative ways to expand our department and get more budget and get more bodies in there. But I don't know if that's a way of answering what you what your question was.
I just want to sit back and let you go, because this is awesome. Like, you're giving so much great insight and storytelling as well from your experience there, and hearing about how you organically kind of started to think more about monetizing social, and that ended up to the your success from the agency side as well. But I do want to touch on something really quick, because it seems like it's bubbling up to the surface now, is the idea of who you were with the Knicks, and prior to that with the Timberwolves, as this sort of face, that someone that people could live vicariously through, someone that people could get to know a little bit, like, hey, Jonah's talking to this person today at practice, or and following you in addition to the team. And we're starting to see a little bit of that especially with the advent of TikTok and Instagram stories as well. You see some clubs or teams across the world might have almost like a digital host that takes them around, and some don't, some do. And so what's your, having been in those shoes, what's your take on where that's all going? Should each team sort of have a face that people can get to know and live alongside, and almost kind of be their friend that has really good access and can talk to the players? Or is it really let the brand speak for itself and don't have that face, because that face won't be there forever?
I think that the team should have that, because, and I look at it the same way as I would look at Mike Breen. right? Like he works for MSG Network, and de facto he works for, the New York Knicks and MSG. So, there always was, well, Jonah, yeah, that's cool. You're giving us the information, but you're never going to say anything bad about the team, or you're never going to really, dive into like the salacious stories. And they're right. But either would Mike Breen, and when he covers a game, and if I can be, again, I was at every practice, every shoot around, every game on the road, summer league, all-star. So the coverage, even at the Knicks level, was not wide enough to get, if you were a diehard fan and I remember, doing one-on-one interviews with the summer league team and just getting to know those guys, and maybe they could be a player that would eventually develop. Or when Kristaps Porzingis was first in Vegas. And so I do think that teams would benefit from a personality. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game in the sense that only the messaging comes from the brand. I think you can have some personalities under the brand, just as you do the personalities that are going to be on radio broadcasting the games, the personalities that are going to be on TV broadcasting the games, the sideline reporters, the color commentators, the studio host, Wally Zerbiak, for example. Those are the same. It's just an expanded role where you can do a little bit more fun, interactive type pieces of content. But I think that it's important because, it's more than just the logo. The product is the players, and that's a human being. Those are human beings. It's not an iPhone. It's not a laptop. So you are trying to get people to buy your product, which is a human. It's a very difficult thing to do. So I think you need another human and human touch to bring those two parties together and to build a relationship. And I think it's advantageous to have some people on the ground. And I think it's a worthwhile investment too, to potentially partner up with brands and other sponsors to deliver that content. And, and it can be a mix of both. It doesn't have to be somebody who's on air necessarily, but it can be somebody who's at least delivering social media content or updates, or you get a feel that there's actually somebody behind the curtain there.
Yeah, I mean, I actually had years ago on this podcast, we talked to some team insiders and how and that was a little bit of like the digital reporter role of sort of an in-house beat reporter with at least the unspoken facts that they're not necessarily going to go into every potential storyline, and then you have this digital host that we were alluding to earlier, and there certainly is a role for that to A, deliver more content, B, to have a human that you can connect to and that can show perhaps more emotion than with the ups and downs than some team accounts do. And actually, I want to touch on that really quickly as well, because I am interested in how you, especially now that you're working with so many big brands and creating content on their behalf oftentimes or in collaboration with them. So when you're with the Knicks and even into your time now today, both NKTG previously and now with Heartland, of what that voice is and was like when you went from speaking on behalf of Jonah and Knicks in-house reporter, Jonah, to how the social team there really started to craft that voice and personality for the Knicks. I think, it's well known and well accepted almost that NBA teams were some of the early adopters of having more personality, of having that voice on Twitter, among other places. So as that became more of a thing, I'm guessing while you were there with the Knicks, how did that develop from your perspective, both as your own voice as Jonah, as well as the Knicks brand voice?
Yeah, my voice was fairly authentic, of who I am and what I am, and that was my social persona, I guess you could say. I didn't really veer from that, although you have to make sure that you're not saying anything that's going to get yourself or the team in trouble or get viewers upset or whatever it was, cause any sort of controversy. But a big change happened when the Knicks decided to finally, and I say finally because it took until like my fourth year there, and I had none of this prior at the Knicks or at the Timberwolves of a copywriter. And it's crazy to me to think that, so much responsibility is put on that person who's running the social accounts to be, essentially, you have to be a digital content creator. You have to be a strategist. You have to be involved in the data. You have to then be a copywriter. You have to be a marketer. Like it's too much to ask for. And it's unlike any brand platform, because on the team social accounts, it's not always on. It's always on, like with the capital always, right? Like, I've heard always on thrown around for some brands, and that means like, okay, maybe a post a day, maybe. Like I was doing 40 or 50 a day, right? That would include the team updates during the game. So you're doing real-time score updates. You're doing also the brand messaging. You're doing all these things. So what changed was when we had a copywriter and we sat down and we said, how are we going to speak? Like literally, are we going to say we or they?
Yeah.
Are we a we or are we they? And we made the change to go to a we. Like we are the Knicks. We are the Knicks. And it helps so much, even though that copywriter wasn't writing every tweet or post on Instagram or on Facebook. It helped us to clarify the role of that person. And I would advise that every department has a dedicated copywriter that is working day to day on that messaging. And again, it's more of a guideline. We developed a whole book on like, here's how we do the messaging during a game. Here's how we do it on off days. Here's how we talk about big events, right? Like September 11th is very important in New York City. So those things are so important because, again, the level of responsibility that you're putting on these people, and for myself, that I felt it all the time of having to then, the New York Knicks channels, which can reach millions of people within one click. And I've got to somehow craft the right tone and messaging for Charles Oakley getting tossed out of the arena, or the team, Kristaps Porzingis going down for the year with a knee injury. Like it's a lot. It's a lot to ask for. And luckily, I developed a great relationship with the PR teams at both my stops, and that was essential. If you're getting into the business and you want to work with a team, or you are working with a team, you gotta build that relationship with basketball operations or football operations, and also the PR team and the communications team, because they are the ones that are carrying out a message, are crafting it, and you have to be a part of that. But that's really where, my voice was, hey, here's the latest here, and maybe a retweet from the Knicks account to say like, there's some insight, right, that I would provide that would sound odd from a Knicks account, but it would sound okay from myself, right? Or previewing content that's coming up and talking about it, or asking fans, hey, what do you want me to ask? And then once we post the final piece of content, that would live on the Knicks channels, and I would share that. So it was kind of a two-way relationship that I saw it with myself and the team. But you really need the people there to help craft that voice. It's very important, and it's so important, not just what you're expressing to the large public, but for those staff people, those people who are running the accounts, to feel comfortable and have the guardrails of how they should talk, so that you don't see a moment where we see many times before where people can get in trouble, and they always say the stupid social media intern. Like, that's such a dumb phrase. Like, again, a lot of these people who are running those accounts are seasoned vets and been in marketing, branding, and are very experienced and very talented. You're going to make a mistake, and things are going to happen. And it's unfortunate with that job. It happens in front of everybody else, where things can get, taken out of context. And so I think it's really important that teams work on having that structure, having that department that can really help craft what the voice is and how they're going to express information to their fan base.
Yeah, I love that insight, because really, if a rogue tweet goes out or whatever, and even if it is from the intern, that's a failure on the leadership part of it, of not having those guardrails structured, or not having understanding of what the brand should or shouldn't say per se, and to be able to have it so that if Jonah is tweeting one day and someone else is tweeting on behalf of the Knicks another day, that it's not distinguishable, that it's not, that voice, it goes beyond the person behind the keyboard. And I feel like said that a lot over the years, but and some people practice it, some organizations practice it better than others for sure.
And also too, and during our league meetings, I'll again give you a peek behind the curtain. There was a lot of discussion when I was at the Knicks, and other teams were starting to sort of take shots. I think it's still happening too.
Yeah.
Take shots at other teams. I was on the side of I didn't see a benefit in that. You may get some cheap engagement, but it just doesn't. It's not a good look for the league or the teams, and also it's kind of dopey because it's like a regular season game and you're talking shit. Listen, it's all going to come around at some point. And it just felt like a lot of keyboard warriors. And it, I think, also kind of created a culture of where we're kind of at now at social, where people are just looking to dunk on other people. And I didn't like that coming from the team accounts, because where I was at with the Knicks, there's no way I could get involved in that kind of back and forth with another team. So another team would take a shot and I can't say anything. We can't say anything. So then fans are like, oh, the Knicks got dunked on. They get, but nobody knows what's going on behind the scenes, because I would get fired if I engaged in that type of stuff. So when we're sitting there at league meetings with my 29 other counterparts, I'm saying this is not a fair fight. You know what I mean? So we got to all be on the same page here and not engage in this type of stuff. And I still don't think it works. It's just cheap. So that was my viewpoint and where they were at, but you can still see it to this day. I think last night there was some shots fired at teams, and I don't know. I don't see it as a value. I really don't.
No, I mean, we don't need to go down this rabbit hole, but I as you were telling that, about that, I was thinking of the infamous Houston Rockets tweet with for the kids that they don't remember it, they're too young to listen to this podcast. Just Google Houston Rockets gun emoji, and yeah, you'll it's a lesson to be learned there for sure. But a few more minutes left here with Jonah Ballow. He is the founder and head of content strategy production for the Heartland Group. Let's talk a little about what it's like then working with brands and knowing what their guardrails look like, and both encouraging them, but also not pushing them to take chances, to refine their voice, to do things that might be different than what they did previously. So what's that collaboration like of working with brands to help elevate and improve what they're doing while also staying true to who they are and who they tell you they want to be?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because I think a lot of brands sometimes feel the need to do more than they should. So sometimes it's a discussion of well, do you need to do this content? What is the goal here? You kind of got to backtrack a little bit. When I work with the teams, it was fairly straightforward, right? I wanted to bring as much content to the fan base as possible, basketball related, content related. But with the brand, you have to kind of back out of it. What are your goals and objectives? Is it to sell a product? Is it to build brand awareness? Where are you at? Toyota, I did a lot of content with them at MKTG, and they wanted to then develop their other sponsorships in the other racing leagues. So Formula Drift is a project that I worked on, and I again said, well, that's great. Then we should tell human stories about the drivers and who they are, and go inside, just as I would with the Knicks or the Timberwolves, go inside racing, right? Really develop this cool stuff that, listen, it's a niche audience. You have to really tell the story well and articulate it in the right way. So it's always kind of a fact-finding mission, of what is the content that you're trying to create and why. And I think we start there, we try to backtrack a little bit, and then that develops the strategy for the content, not just to do things because it's cool, but to do things that are going to, again, if your goal is at the end of this to sell a certain amount of tickets or product or whatever it is, that we're achieving that goal. We have a client, Scripted Fragrance, who makes these amazing candles, and they're a small business, but growing just crazy. They're based in upstate New York. And, really they needed a brand identity video. The product was selling. They did some great stuff. They were featured on CBS. But if you come to the website, you didn't get a real idea that this was a mother-daughter, female-owned company that started this company together. And the way that they approach the candles, why the candles are better than the competitor, and just the nature of their business and how they operate. And once you see that story on their website, you really get a sense of who they are and why I'm now invested in them, not just the product. So that's kind of an example of how we think and how we try to strategize. But I love the word that you use because it's collaboration. I don't really like the idea of, the client agency sort of relationship that is, hey, we'll brief you, go away for 3 weeks, come back with some big ideas, and then we'll see what works. And inevitably that doesn't work. If we collaborate almost as one team, and we sort of inch, again, we could bring a 20-page deck back to you. That's beautiful. And then there's like nothing in that you would actually use. As opposed to that, I'd like to think about things that we can collaborate together. What hasn't worked, what has worked. Let's throw out some ideas here, brainstorm together, and really build something in a collaborative way. Our relationship right now with the New York Red Bulls, which is a very interesting case study because that's a big brand, Red Bull, that's attached to a soccer club. Yeah. But we are, I would say, an extension of their creative social team now. And it's as if we work with the team. That's my relationship with our partners there. And we bring them ideas and we don't fear like, oh, they're going to steal them or, this is something they're going to go to another agency. They bring us, here's an idea. What do you guys think? How can we get this accomplished? And then we come back with some real technical stuff. So I think I just treat every client very differently based on what their needs are, but it really works best when they're very transparent about budgets, about what their end goals are for the project. And how we can accomplish that together. I think you get the best out of it because essentially what you're looking at is internally that client can't achieve what they're looking for you to do. So if you can find ways to make them look good on whatever it is, or really fine tune their objectives, you'll land in the spot where what you're creating will work for that organization. But I think that the first step is also saying like, what is the reason for this? What do you want to do with this content? And sometimes they're just like, hey, we need to do cool stuff to make my boss happy. It can sometimes be that simple, but most of the times I think that there's been a genuine need for the content. The NFLPA, who we do work for on this community MVP, every week they award a player the community MVP for his work outside of or off the field, right? And it's what they're doing. And it's a great way to showcase these athletes and how much they do give back every single week. And we want to so our goal is like, hey, let's make this cool, this content where it would receive high engagement, not only from the fan base, but the players would be proud to share it because it's cool content in their feeds. Mm-hmm. So the objective was to get the players to also be interested in the content where they can share it. And therefore also people would get the message out of all these great things the players are doing in their community. So it's kind of a level in which you really try to figure out what's going on with the brand and what their objectives are. And then you kind of back into what is the strategy and how my team can really develop something unique and interesting and strategic for them. But it's also creative strategy. Sometimes we look at creative as a separate thing. The creative has to have some strategy lens to it. And we always think about what is the story that we're telling through the creative and how that creative can be strategic for the brand itself.
Love this. To really be able to have really understand that there is strategy with creative, that you're producing something for a purpose, and that's going to make everyone, do their job better and allow you to collaborate more effectively when you all know what the purpose of this is and why we're doing what we're doing. When it comes to really understanding what content is worth producing and how to best do it and understanding the value of content, I want to dive into that for just a quick minute here on looking at, for example, let's say the New York Red Bulls or a brand or an NFLPA, whatever they have, or even with the Knicks back in the day, they are putting out a given graphic to highlight a player achievement or a player of the week or whatever it might be, or the NFLPA example versus one that has a sponsor associated with it. Therefore, it is quote unquote revenue producing, and we can put more of a dollar figure on the revenue that's bringing in to some degree. How do you go about balancing? Hey, we want to make sure that we're putting out non-sponsored content that elevates our brand, that highlights our players, that highlights some storyline that we want to get out there, some story we want to tell, versus hey, we need to focus on our time and efforts on the stuff that is quote unquote producing measurable ROI, as if the other content was not producing ROI. Like, what's that balance like of, and how do you really put not a price, but a value on just content, not for content's sake, but content that is not sponsored, that we're going to continue to put time and effort into because we do see value in it?
Yeah, boy, that's a tough one, right? That's the ultimate one, because a lot of the questions are, okay, well, does this mean I will get X at the end of it, right? And we can't promise you're going to get amount of followers or, people will intend to purchase that item or whatever it is you're selling. It's a very difficult thing to get across, but the brands and the teams and the leagues that get that, like, hey, our content is for our fans, and if it's paid for or it's organic, it always needs to go to that base, and consistently. I think those are the ones that are going to win. And sometimes in business and life, some people do it better than others. And if you don't buy into the idea that there has to be first of all, it's a minimal investment. Like, let's be honest, how many millions of dollars do brands spend on 30-second TV ads that sometimes I watch and I'm like, I don't even know what the fuck this is for. Like, some of these Geico ads, I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't even know what this is. What is this? It has nothing to do with what they're trying to do, but they're trying to get your eyeballs, right? So they'll spend millions of dollars on that. I mean, millions. And yet, for some reason, the social digital doesn't get the same allocated dollars or the bandwidth to succeed in a way that doesn't have an immediate ROI. Now, there's certain ways to achieve that, and certain brands need to have a way to sell. I mean, ultimately, that's the bottom line. But everything, you're right, everything goes into that pot, and there's certain levels that will be content that you need to consistently do that will not have a direct, like, oh, I see this sold for this. This is a mechanism that the person used to buy these pants. It's a way of, presenting yourself on social. I mean, I think there's some really great D2C brands that just do it. They have good content. They serve it up well from a strategic standpoint, and it's delivered to you in a way that makes you want to be a fan of the brand and then purchase. So it has to go hand in hand. And I would love to say and tell you I got the answer to it. I don't. Mm-hmm. I think it's always going to be a difficult sort of discussion with a brand if they're not willing to see the value in it. It's unlikely to have success, in my opinion. And we've ran across that a couple of times where, some brands have come to us and said, okay, we want to do this. And they say, well, we have X amount of dollars, and it's nowhere near what you would need to get something done at a quality level. And we respectfully just have to decline and say, that's just not where we're at as a company. We think there's a value there. And yes, sometimes you won't see the direct result tomorrow, 30 days from now, a year from now, but you're building to that. And the ones that do it well, and who they are, I mean, you'll see it. they're out there, are doing it well. And I think, the team thing is the same deal, right? You got to build that loyalty, that fan base, and have those people fall in love with the brand. And when they get good, it's great, because anybody can sell something, Apple, when it's on fire, right? Right now, when you put out anything right now with an Apple logo on it, and people are going to buy it. But it wasn't that way when Steve Jobs started, and now that a team is good, the Warriors were terrible for a decade, right? Mm-hmm. And now that they got Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, had Kevin Durant, they're a team that has cachet and will have followers. The content always does well. Let me see what you can do when the team isn't good. And I prided myself on that. Let's see what you do when you're a smaller brand that can't challenge the brand, recognition of an Apple, and come up through that. And then let's talk about marketing. But I think that the brands who really take a leap of faith, they invest in the digital, social, the creative, right? Because that's where we're at, and really see the value in it. These NFL PA pieces that we've done have the engagements off the charts, and it's a minimal investment to showcase your players, and it has more of a result than just people buying tickets to the games or people watching the games. It has people saying like, wow, these guys are doing a lot in our communities, and they're an important part of our communities, and they're more than just football players, and they're businessmen, and they do other things outside of it. And then that attraction to them becomes more important. I'll just quickly say this. I said it early on when I've done a couple of speaking engagements about brands, is the UFC. I'm a big MMA enthusiast, and the UFC early on really did a good job after The Ultimate Fighter blew up on Spike, and they started getting a huge fan base from the fighting part of it. But they did a really good job at starting to tell stories and build up storylines, where I think boxing has kind of failed at that. They've started to get back into it. But really, like, there are a lot of lower level fights, not the main Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey type blockbusters. And they even told the stories of those two very well. But there's been consistent storytelling. They do digital and social the best. And again, this is them now, but look back 20 years ago when they were not legalized in states. They were a brand that dedicated themselves and invested into the storytelling of their fighters. And it's paying dividends now, because you have a billion-dollar machine. You have the storytelling, you have the digital interest, and you have the pay-per-view and the live gate and all those things. When I was in college, and this is early on in the UFC, I would watch the fights with my roommate. My girlfriend at the time did not like the UFC. She came over one night. She's like, I want to go out to dinner. I'm like, tried to talk her into going to a bar with the UFC fights. She was not happy about it. We go to the bar. It's packed. Everybody's watching. All the TVs have it on. The sound, it's going. And they do these vignettes leading up to the fight where the fighters talk about, the preparation for it while they're doing it. And I noticed she started like locking into that part of it. And then all of a sudden the fighter was walking out to the octagon, and she turns to me. She's like, I'm cheering for him. And I'm like, what? And she was like, I like his story. And it clicked, because it was like, wow, just within that 2-minute vignette leading up to the fight, she's already made a decision of who she's cheering for. She had no idea about the sport. She didn't know if this guy was good at submissions, a knockout artist, was a career journeyman, whatever it is from a fighting perspective. But she bought into the story of the fight, and then she was hooked into that moment. So I think that's a good lesson for a lot of these brands and sports leagues and teams, to build that storyline, build the interest, and then people will buy into it organically and paid.
Oh, I love that. I love that anecdote, and all the points you just made there. Like, so much good stuff, Jonah. We have one quick thing before we get to the terrible stat. I promise we'll get there in just a second. But Jonah, I could just talk to you for hours. There are so many different avenues I still want to travel down. So we might have you back for part 2 at some point. Sure. It's just so awesome. But let's touch on the creative aspect real quick. Because in some ways it's getting easier to create content with apps and everything along these lines, and all the TikTok effects and whatnot. And I sound like an old person right now. But other ways, it's never been harder to create content that actually cuts through, that gets attention, that earns attention. So, like, as you guys move forward in your roles with Heartland Group and working with brands and teams and organizations on content, what's going to separate the good from the not so good? What's going to be a differentiating factor moving forward to really make sure that you do stand out in a increasingly crowded world of content that may not look the same, but is certainly more accessible in all forms to your average everyday Joe Schmo with a mobile device?
Yeah, it is. It's really challenging right now. And it's also exciting, at the same time. I think that first you have to know the platform that you're creating the content for. What we're seeing is the platforms are becoming very different in multiple ways. The algorithm in the way that the content is served up to the end user, and then also how the content is delivered from a time length, quality. Is it quick turn? Is this something that's going to live forever? Is this, I always have to like pull back and say, I can't put a 3-minute brand identity video on Instagram. It's probably not going to be seen, but there's such a disparity in the content, right? Like if you look at podcasts and you look at YouTube, long form, right? And you look at Twitter and Instagram, TikTok, Reels, all these are more short form, and there's a fight for the audience. I think once you sort of decide here's where the content's going to live, and we do this all the time of how do we attract. So if it's a creative post with the artwork, it's gotta have a visual element that is different or exciting or unique to grab somebody's eyeballs. Then I think it has to have a little bit of a storytelling lens in it, and it can be done just with an illustration. It can be done with an animation, some movement that adds to it. So there's different ways to present. And what I love so much about what we do at Heartland, and what's so exciting, is because we have a collective and we have artists who are so good at different things. It was about a year ago. We discovered this artist, Gold Yeller, and he does stop motion Lego content. And I bring up him as an example because this is a perfect example of, okay, this is a little different, right? Stop motion, of course, has been done, on TV and done on social, but here he is recreating big moments through Lego characters. And I saw his Tiger Woods stuff and I was like, this is fantastic, because even if you're like, oh, it's a little like, is it for younger kids? Is it what? It doesn't matter. It's presenting something in a new, unique way of telling the story. Sure, we could show Tiger's putt or his comeback story in winning the Masters, but what if we did it in this unique way? And there's also, you didn't need accessibility to Tiger Woods, which I can imagine is unbelievably difficult. And, he did stuff for the Nuggets too, where it was during COVID and you couldn't get Jamal Murray on camera or have a crew out there to tell that story. And because it's oversaturated with video content, this is a perfect medium. So we collaborated with him and Clemson to have the first post when Trevor Lawrence was drafted #1 by the Jaguars. And again, we didn't just make any stop motion Lego thing of just a piece that looked like Trevor Lawrence. The story was that Trevor Lawrence was going to walk down that hill that you see at Clemson, which is amazing. And he was going to get to the bottom of the hill, take off his Clemson jersey, and Dabo Swinney, the head coach at Clemson, would hand him the Jaguars jersey. He put on the Jaguars jersey and he's off. Right, like the dad's sending him off to the college or to the works. Right, he was on to his next career and he was leaving, and it was like this. It's supposed to be this emotional moment, and Clemson loved it. It was the first post that we went out. It got crazy engagement numbers, as you would expect.
Okay.
That's an example of me saying like there's different storytelling mechanisms, but I would always look for the creative to stand out. And again, stop motion in Instagram, Twitter works. It just works. Like there's a way to deliver it because it's short and it catches your eye, and you're going to want to, stop your thumb on the scroll and check out that content. Now, I'm also editing a documentary on the official Milwaukee Bucks DJ. This is straight purpose is for YouTube because I need to tell a story. It needs to be longer than 9-10 minutes, and you need to understand where she came from, where she's going, and why she's here and why she's important. And yes, we'll have teasers that will go on the other platforms, Instagram and Twitter, but the episodes will live on YouTube, and that's the medium for it. So find the medium, find the platform where you're trying to, create the content, and then look for the unique ways. The rotoscoping stuff has been great on Twitter, for highlights. Twitter and Instagram have done really well with that. But we live, I think, in almost like a golden age for the creators, these kids who are, 20 or younger or in the mid-20s who have taught themselves that on all the Adobe products, or the ability to bring this content to life, a little bit different version of what I was doing earlier on when I was teaching myself HTML. And there's so many creative ways to deliver it. And so it's thinking outside the box, always challenging the norm, not just looking at something and saying, let's replicate what, Nike did, or what a brand did, or what another team did. If the Brooklyn Nets did this, let's do that. And I think you'll find yourself in a good spot of innovative ways to bring the content and match that with unique storytelling. And I think that's a pretty basic, great recipe for winning on social.
Oh, it's so good, and it rings so true. I mean, I always joke with people on like NFL Sundays when everyone is posting the same clip from like a given game, and it just becomes a caption contest. It's like, okay, we're all going to post the same exact video and go with our different spin on it. It's like, okay, I saw it from SI, now I saw it from ESPN, now I saw it from NFL, I saw it from the team, and how can you be different? How can you cut through that noise? And a nice, awesome Getty image probably doesn't do as well as something that you did on Procreate that looks like you did on like Microsoft Paint back in the day, just because it's different. And I love the idea of standing out, but with a reason and for the platform, and within a storytelling mechanism as well, a storytelling prism.
Yeah, and I'll give you about behind the scenes. We haven't released. We do these animations for the National Basketball Retired Players Association, which is Legends, and they have these great podcasts with Trill Withers on he's on Twitter. And he has Charles Barkley on. He's had Desmond Mason on. He had Alonzo Mourning. We've already released the Alonzo Mourning story where he talks about his first All-Star. I love doing these, by the way. This is probably my favorite thing that we do, is when we have a podcast or a YouTube clip or an interview and we bring it to life in animation, because we always can build out, to me, the B-roll and the story and the extras maybe that do or don't exist, that brings to life the story. And it's so different when you see it as opposed to just hearing somebody talk about it. So Alonzo Mourning talks about his first playoff appearance was in Minnesota, and he goes to Minneapolis and he goes to Prince's house for a party. And he talks about how wild, and again, like, you don't have the visual for this. So we developed the story for it, and the animation is crazy. We have Alonzo Mourning in line with Del Curry and a little baby Steph Curry, the Hornets mascot, inside, at the concert that Prince is having. You have Carmen Electra there, who, he dated at one time. You have the Batman characters. Prince did the soundtrack for Batman. So we do all these crazy things. And again, it elevates and lifts the content. You can look at the metrics on what the interview, which was great, and we love having those podcast interviews. But if you look at the metrics on the one with the animation story, it just elevates it to a different level. And you talk about what you're saying with, even if it's done differently, even if it's like kind of a, Microsoft Paint, like we're doing an 8-bit sort of NBA Jam story about Desmond Mason and Gary Payton almost getting into a fight on Desmond Mason's first practice with the Sonics. And it's all going to be done in this 8-bit style. But again, it's so unique. And when you see it, you'll immediately gravitate towards something different and a different way of bringing that story to life. So those are just a couple of our examples. And, again, this is, we sit down every day, Keith, Elliott, myself, and this is what we think about. How can we do it different, unique, and stand out in a way that will either bring viewers to it and attract it to whatever that piece of content is, or, deliver something for the brand that is meeting their objectives.
So much fun. I want like a permanent invite to be a fly on the wall for any of those brainstorm sessions, because it's so much fun, and the stuff you guys come out with is just phenomenal. And I'm just grinning with glee, because it's so awesome to hear about it and how it all comes together. Well, Jonah, we could go for another couple hours, I think, easily, but we are going to have some quick hitters coming up in our jump shots with Jonah segment. But first, episode shareable stat, and that's coming right up. So good talking to Jonah. Doing great work there along with Keith and Elliott and the rest of their team at Heartland Group. And just so much fun picking his brain. And again, just Awesome stuff from him. But stick around because in our quick hitters, you're going to hear more from Jonah, more great stories. You're really going to want to hear the story about a fun bit that he did with the Timberwolves and Kevin Love and Wes Johnson, among other things. So stick around for that. But first, this episode's shareable stat. This episode's shareable stat is 5,048 as of this recording, at least. And that is the number of replies to a recent Alabama men's basketball tweet announcing the final score of their loss against Auburn. Over 5,000 replies, and the vast majority of those were not from Alabama fans, not from Alabama men's basketball fans, but from Auburn fans. This is apparently something that they've been doing all season when it comes to their team winning. When the men's basketball team wins, thousands of fans, or at least hundreds of fans, I'm not sure exactly how many there are, they just invade the tweet of the team that lost, their final score tweet, and they respond with tons and tons of memes. You can read about the origin if you look it up. I also tweet it. You can check out my Twitter timeline. But it's pretty interesting, mostly because they really are this group. They're not officially part of the Auburn athletics program, but they are a very organized group of fans that is interesting how they operate. They actually, work together. They collaborate. They teach others who want to learn how to create memes. How to use various tools and apps out there that can help you easily create memes so that you're ready to go when the team wins and can definitely invade the other team's final score tweet. And really what to take away from this is helping fans to do more of what they want to do, which is create fun content and also unite with each other. The Auburn men's basketball program did not come up with this. They're not necessarily fostering this. They're not doing anything to prevent it, of course. But how can you give your fans the ability to connect with each other? And also, how can you empower your fans, educate your fans on to create cool content? A lot of fans are out there. They fun memes. They see fun GIFs or videos or whatever it may be. And some of them may not have the tools or skill set that a social media pro does, or even a social media fluent person does. So how can you help them use an app? How can you help these older folks that may not know the apps as well create cool content like this that they may want to post on platforms and really empower them to engage? So I won't spend too much more time on this, but it's just so thought-provoking, pretty interesting story. I recommend you go read about it. But again, this episode's shareable stat, 5,048 replies to the final score of the Alabama versus Auburn men's basketball game, the final score tweet sent out by Alabama. And all those replies were pretty much from Auburn fans sending memes, which they've been doing all season long whenever their team wins a game. So check it out. Again, talk about it. Definitely a thought-provoking one. But stick around for the rest of my conversation with some quick hitters with Jonah Ballow of Heartland Group. Back in this episode's shareable stat, and I am joined once again by Jonah Ballow. He is the founder and head of content strategy and production for Heartland Group. Jonah, I was just telling you, I feel like I got a master class there in our previous segment. So are you now ready, getting your old shooting stroke ready and ready for some jump shots with Jonah?
Yeah, I mean, boy, I don't know. My jumper's probably pretty broke these days, but yeah, I'll try to warm up for you.
Hey, we're all getting back. We can all get back in the swing of things. Klay Thompson will be hitting threes again like no other, so you'll get the stroke back.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're putting me in the same conversation as Klay Thompson. You definitely made my day.
Number one for you, Jonah. Tell me, going back to your time with the Knicks, the most memorable piece of content, post, or campaign from your time there.
All right. Can I do a little sidetrack on this one? I replaced the Wolves for the Knicks. The Knicks, we did some great stuff. I would say, the celebrity interviews that I was able to do almost on a nightly basis was some of the greatest stuff that we were able to capture. But I share the Timberwolves story because that's really when it clicked for me of kind of the type of content that I wanted to create and do for the team. So, this will take a little bit of a story, but there was a moment in time, Kevin Love was playing with the Timberwolves, and Wes Johnson, player out of Syracuse, was a rookie that year. And there was a moment, the guys always do the customary handshake or hand slap after a free throw. They come together and they give each other the free throw. Well, Kevin Love was at the free throw line and he hits his shot and he goes to give the handshake, but he kind of turns around and him and Wes Johnson are keep missing it in air. And, it's like a kind of a mundane thing that happens. It was looked awkward as hell, but Yahoo Sports posted this video and a lot of people were just like, this is hilarious. That is so awkward and ridiculous. So I had an idea of what if we did this kind of like an SNL style bit of like, this really was a big deal that these guys could not get the handshake right. And they went into practice and had to figure it out. So I talked to the PR team and they brought it up with Kevin Love, and Kevin was great. He's like, yeah, let's do it. So you'd have to go online and search investigative report, the awkward handshake, Minnesota Timberwolves, and it'll come up on YouTube. But we put together this piece, and it was basically satire. And Kevin Love says, he's been working at it hard. He says, I'm in the gym, working. We have practice footage. We talked to an assistant coach, and like Johnny Flynn was there, and he's like, man, I don't understand why these guys can't get it right. And then we went around the arena, and we had like all the concessions crew like nailing the handshake. We had the little Cub Scouts who were at the game nailing handshakes, and I'm like, everybody else can do it, but these two guys. And then we got this moment where they did it in the game, and we have like a little dinger that went off, and Wes Johnson gives a thumbs up. So I'm probably not doing it justice, but what was so interesting about this, we worked on it for, I think it was like a week, my videographer at the time, and I sent it over to our PR team. They liked it. And the night before I was going to post it, and we talked about how I was kind of doing all of it. So I was posting it to the website, posting it to the YouTube channel and all that stuff. And I got nervous. I was like, this is going to be stupid. Like, people are not going to like this thing. And I was just like, I don't know. I don't know if I should do this. So I'm kind of going back and forth in my head. Like, I don't know. I'm like, you know what? Screw it. Post it. Next day I wake up, going to work, normal. My PR guy comes over to my cubicle. He's like, dude, this thing's blowing up. And I'm like, what? And I looked at my email. The NBA is like, we want to use this on NBA.com.
Wow.
ESPN reached out. Yahoo Sports put it on their homepage. Jim Rome is Burning, the TV show, did it. Posted it up, put it on their show. Jim Rome was talking about it.
Damn.
It got 1 million views. It was viral, right? That was my first experience of having a viral piece of content. And so it was so funny. I go down to practice that day, and at the time, Kevin Love was the best player on the team, and he was surrounded by the reporters. And I was kind of waiting my turn for another player. I was going to interview Kevin that day, and I hadn't seen him since it came out. And everybody kind of cleared away, and he gave me a look, and he just put out his like fist and gave me like a fist pump. He's like, that was damn good. And it was just kind of this moment where you could see like where things were headed. Where players were like into like making content that's funny. Like Blake Griffin all of a sudden started doing really funny stuff, right? And where Kevin didn't take himself seriously. West, they were not a good team at the time, but there's a throw line to this, right? Of what we've talked about a lot of like, if you're a fan of the team, you're like, wow, I like these guys. Like, they're likable dudes, they don't take themselves too seriously. Here's the thing where they kind of fucked up on the court, but it's funny. And so it really clicked for me at that point of like, wow, this is the type of stuff I want to do. This is the type of content that I can deliver that, the local newspapers, the local TV stations, not even the NBA at the league level, because they can't do all the teams. Nobody else is going to be able to do this with these guys except for us. And that was one of the most exciting moments in my career. And I still look back at it today as one of the things that really was a springboard into what I'm doing now and how I think about content.
So good, man. I what an awesome story, and I really want to watch the full piece now, and I will have to as soon as we're done here. So good. Number two, dip back into the memory bank again. Throughout your entire life so far, as a fan or as an employee, either one, I'll let you choose, the most memorable game that you've been at.
Okay, I'm going to do two. Again, I'm going to break your questions. The most memorable game for work was no doubt for the New York Knicks. I started with the Knicks actually during the lockout season, so in 2012, and it sucked because I couldn't do anything with the players. We did some community events with the alumni, but I really couldn't do any new thing. Like, they were stripped off the website. We could not talk about them. It was tough. But eventually they got the lockout sorted, and the first game started on Christmas night, and it was Christmas Day, I should say, Christmas Day against the Boston Celtics. Now, this was the Rajon Rondo, Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, the team that won the championship, Celtics. So great team. Carmelo was there with the Knicks, Amari Stoudemire. There was a lot of optimism around what the New York team could bring. So it was my first game covering, the New York Knicks at MSG as an employee for the team. it was snowing in New York. So I'm walking over to Madison Square Garden. It's like snow flurries out, Christmas Day. Everybody's hyped. It's on national TV. So I go cover the game, and we had the opportunity to interview celebrities. And I went on the court pregame, and I interviewed Chris Rock and Tracy Morgan. And the Knicks beat the Celtics on Christmas Day at MSG with it snowing. And to this day, I went home and I sat down at my desk and just like, I can't believe, like, what is this? Like, I couldn't have wrote a better script to my first game covering it for the Knicks. And it was just one of those moments that always stands out for me as something that's so exciting. And again, to be at Madison Square Garden for that game and interview those guys on the Garden floor and see a win is something that I'll never forget.
That's a pinch me moment right there.
Yeah, and my other one was, as a fan, again, it's for me to go to games now. It's not as big of a deal. I almost rather watch them at home at sometimes. But as I said, I was an MMA enthusiast, and I went to the Conor McGregor Jose Aldo fight in Vegas, and that was an experience that I have never seen in my life. The Irish came flooding in. I was staying at the MGM Grand where it was at. It was one of the most intense atmospheres, and the hype around the fight. Conor wins, dead knockout, 6 seconds. The place exploded. It just, there's nothing that rivals a big fight in Las Vegas. And I've been to a lot of really cool events. And I just have never seen or been at something that matched it. And it was absolutely electric, and one of my favorite sports moments of all time.
Nice. Yeah, UFC events, they truly are events and spectacles, and that one, especially with Conor McGregor, just sounds unreal out there in Vegas. Oh, the next stories too is still giving me goosebumps. That's awesome. Number 3 for you, Jonah. Tell me, you talked about discovering some artists here and there with Heartland and working to develop that collective, but just overall too when it comes to trends and inspiration for content. In brief, like how do you go about keeping up with trends and artists and new ideas?
Yeah, I'm constantly on social channels, and consuming content, looking at the ways that brands, teams, leagues are creating it. And one of the more rewarding things about what we've done at Heartland is partnered up again, like that, the guy Gold Yeller, who I brought up. And we're also working with another gentleman who's developing these figurines off of 3D modeling. And it's just incredible work that he's done. Is really a lot of these artists that are out there now. And Elliot is also one of those people who kind of will create some inspiration. Is you start to see what can be done, and then my mind gets going of like, okay, well, I got this type of work or this client that this would be perfect for. You start to match it and you start to think about the storyline. So I really do just consume the content on all platforms. I'm constantly on social, probably too much so. But it's not necessarily where I'm engaging in back and forth with people. It's more of like, hey, I'm taking a look at what's going on in the landscape, and I've curated my feed so that I really get served up a lot of the different content that I think is noteworthy. But that's really where it starts, and it's really just an eye of how the big broadcast platforms are doing it, ESPN, Fox, all the big ones, and then how they deliver that content on social. So it's always being on in that sense. And from there, you can kind of extrapolate what would work for you or how you could adapt that to the content that you want to create.
Yeah, no, it really is like part of a full-time job is to spend time on social. Like as crazy as it sounds, because most people think of social media as a leisure thing. If you work in the space, you have to. It's a different mindset that people have to accept that this is a profession and you have to study it.
And stuff like, what you put out on Twitter, you're a person I follow. And when you kind of do a little mini case study on a post, like that stuff is great. Like people like you who can kind of articulate, oh, this is what a brand did. This is what a team did. I really liked it. I like the positivity too, because there's enough, negative, like trying to trash other, content pieces, but I like surfacing good things to the top, good content. I watch a ton of documentaries. I'm obsessed with it. And TV shows and how they do it better, what medium it works. Is it Netflix or is it releasing one a week? So I am constantly consuming, but I do have to give you a shout out too, because I think that stuff, surfacing some of those elements and maybe giving a little context of what either that brand, team, or league did to bring it to the forefront is really helpful too. And that's also where you can get some great ideas as well.
Totally. I certainly appreciate that from my end, and I'm totally with you there. And also, I just as an aside, I also love documentaries and think that like this whole like historical reenactment stuff. Like I watched some of the stuff like History Channel where they're like it's part documentary and part like dramatization. I think there's an opportunity for that in the sports space. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and players, just another side, players owning the content. I just started watching Man in the Arena. And again, it's through Tom Brady's eyes, but the way the storytelling is working, and again, players are going to want to distribute this content out, and he owns, production companies. So does Peyton Manning. Like they're going to want to then help other athletes surface their own stories. So part of what we do at Heartland is straight to athlete content, right? Creating the athlete to fuel their own channels. And for me, that storytelling part of it's really cool as well. And I've actually been quite surprised at how transparent, honest, and thorough Man in the Arena has become, because you could see where it could just be an ad for Tom Brady, and it's certainly it's hard not to have a magnificent story about the guy, but it I think does a good job of diving into how he got to where he is, and I'm excited for more athletes to dive into that.
No, it's a good call out. I mean, we might think of like the Tom Brady's and Peyton Manning's as being the ones that would have their own production companies and production outlets that make sense to some degree, but you go down the pipeline a little bit, go down the chain, and I remember JaVale McGee when they were in the bubble, like he was putting out some incredible video content on his YouTube, and like there's nothing stopping from players to hire a Heartland, hire whoever it might be to really help them use their platform to the maximum level. All right, number 4, Jonah. I feel like we can do a whole other podcast on all these questions. This is so much fun. Number 4, tell me the brand or team that Heartland does not work with currently, whose content you enjoy and why. So brand, team, whoever stands out to you.
Wow, that's a really good question. There's quite a bit. Yeah, there's quite a bit because we'd like to work with a lot of them. I do think for me, it would be kind of like an HBO, right? Like a more on that line, not of necessarily social brand or team, but a broadcaster that would develop interesting content pieces. Let me give context behind that. I think I've done quite a bit with, some brands, teams, and leagues, and athletes. So for me to work with a broadcast partner like that, and whether it's developing their social, and I think they do a great job at promoting their content. So does, Disney Plus, but I would be interested in that world a little bit more and getting more experience and knowledge of their show lineups and developing original content, whether it's scripted or not. I think that's an interesting space. And I consume a lot of their content. I think it's pretty incredible the amount of shows that they've developed since, I guess Sopranos, we could say, really kind of took HBO to the next level in terms of those content series. So that would be one place where I think I would like to dive into and see, what we could do and how they approach content strategy.
Yeah, that's a good. I've definitely read a bit about HBO in particular with what they've done with their TikTok and among other things. They've done a great job with their content. Number 5, I want to go back to your time with the Jayhawks. Tell me your favorite story or that you worked on during your time covering Kansas sports.
So when I was there, Kansas, hadn't won a national championship since 1988. And they had many shots at it with Roy Williams. Roy Williams was still there. They had a great team. I actually saw, 2 Final Fours. They went to the national championship against Syracuse with Nick Collison, Kirk Heinrich, Keith Langford, Aaron Miles. They had some great teams when I was there, and they just couldn't get over the hump, and it was kind of like can Roy Williams win the big one? You think about that now in his success in North Carolina, it's hard to imagine. But that was a discussion. And you really, it's interesting being on the campus, right? And the fandom. And then also I worked at the newspaper and the TV and the radio station. And I had my own column. And Roy Williams decided to leave Kansas, right? And this was monumental news when he decided to go to North Carolina, which was his alma mater, and I think fulfill a lifetime goal for him, which is fine, he can do that. But a lot of Kansas fans were freaking out, like this was a big deal. This was upsetting the apple cart, and from what they'd known and the success and everybody kind of bought into the all shucks Roy Williams, his personality matched with Kansas and that whole identity. And I wrote a column that I felt Kansas basketball was bigger, and that Roy Williams, that they'll look back and say like, wow, we're fine. Kansas is bigger. We'll get another great coach. I listed actually Bill Self as one of the potential candidates. And I kind of went on a limb and said, it's a little bit, I think, embarrassing for the fan base to, have this much level of freak out or anger or emotion towards Roy Williams. I get it, but I think the program is bigger than that. It was bigger than that when Roy was there, and the attention should be on the next coach, the next direction, and more opportunities. Roy was, at the time, he was getting a lot of kids out of the Midwest and the West Coast. That's where a lot of his recruits were coming out of. And I was like, maybe this will be a chance for a younger coach to come in who could recruit out of, the East Coast, get some New York guys, get some different, levels of talent, and maybe, who knows, deliver a national championship that hasn't happened since '88. And listen, I get to, talk about it now as if I was clairvoyant and knew what was going to happen. But the cool thing about that was I wrote it and I got to see people reading on campus and getting some reactions out of it, good or bad. But my journalism professor called me in, the dean of journalism, called me in and said, hey, I wanted to talk to you about your column. And I was like, oh, what did I do? And she said, listen, this is exactly why you're a columnist. This is exactly what you should write. I applaud you for taking this direction when it was unpopular. And this is the way that you should be thinking critically about, the way you write a column and how you disseminate situations. So for me, that was obviously validating and a huge confidence boost. And then, of course, I can take credit for Bill Self being, an immense success at Kansas, although I'd like more national championships. But listen, he got one. And I think most people, at the end of his career are going to say, it's probably going to be more about Bill Self in Kansas than Roy Williams. So it's interesting how that kind of unfolded.
Yeah, it's a super cool story. I'm a big college fan myself, so I like hearing about that kind of stuff. And for anyone that thought Kansas couldn't win a national championship without Roy Williams, or even with Roy Williams, just Mario Chalmers for the tie. That's all you got to say.
Yep.
One of the best games ever. All right, let's stick on KU basketball really quickly, because I'm going to ask you one of the hardest questions you're going to get on this podcast. Tell me, who's on the Mount Rushmore of Kansas men's basketball?
Wow, that is really a tough one. So it's sort of jaded to when I was there, right? And I think we do this with nostalgia. So I'm just going to give you my bias when I was there. I was a huge Kirk Heinrich fan. I loved his game. Keith Langford, who I mentioned, although I wouldn't put him on the Mount Rushmore. So let me backtrack on that. All right, I'm gonna put Nick Collison on there.
Gotta love it.
I wasn't a Kansas fan until I got there, but I'm gonna have to put Paul Pierce on there.
Okay.
You have to put Wilt Chamberlain on there. I'm gonna put Kirk Heinrich on there. And boy, do you put?
I mean, shoot, man, you got like Danny Manning, Fog Allen.
Well, yeah, I know. Yeah, you would have to put. Well, I was actually thinking about Mario Chalmers, because it's like, you think about one of the biggest, if not the biggest, shot in Kansas history. He didn't have an amazing, illustrious career there in terms of statistically. But you're right, Danny Manning should be on the list. That's a good question. It's, again, how do you judge it? But boy, that was that was a crazy, crazy game. And for him to hit that shot was incredible. So yeah, I'll go with Danny Manning then as the fifth.
It's I told you it was gonna be a hard one.
That is.
We could probably ask a bunch of Kansas fans; they would all come up with a different Mount Rushmore. I'm sure. All right, it's time for one of my favorite things to do on this podcast: to ask our food question. So tell me, you spent all the time in New York, or you can talk about now in Connecticut as well. The best meal to get out there, and where you get it? Where are we gonna go if I come visit you?
Okay. I actually love this sushi restaurant, which I think is fairly reasonable for a New York sushi restaurant. It's called Domo Domo. It's in the Tribeca area, and I love it. Every time I've been there, it's got a cool vibe to it. Sushi is really great. I'm a huge sushi fan. I could probably eat it every night.
So what's the go-to order at Domo Domo? What do we need to get?
Well, if you got some cash, you can do an omakase. But if not, I usually do the traditional fatty tuna roll is probably the best one they have, or the fatty tuna sushi, or sashimi is great. So that would be like one of the go-to orders. But I mean, if you can do the omakase and they give you the sushi that is on the chef's order, that's the move.
Whew. All right. Well, I'll save up and we'll have to make a trip out there.
Definitely.
Number 9, I want to touch this. You talked a little about athletes, really taking advantage of their platform and maximizing what they can do. So tell me, as we look at the NIL space, particularly in college athletics, as it's now available to athletes to actually monetize their NIL. What trend in that space is kind of catching your attention? Something you're really keeping an eye on, whether it's a certain medium or a platform or a strategy. What's kind of catching your eye on the NIL space?
Yeah, I mean, this is one we could definitely do hours and days and weeks on. I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I think it's got and Keith and Elliot and myself, when we talk about this internally and publicly, we really feel strongly that this NIL is an opportunity for college athletes, but it can't be purely transactional, where they're just slapping on a logo or just paying somebody to show up at the car dealership. That there's really some more meaningful things that you can do around it, especially with a college student, right? Like Keith has a great idea of doing a content piece where, the offensive lineman, the star offensive lineman who's going to be an NFL player, maybe would receive the sponsorship from a restaurant, but he gets to bring his offensive lineman to the restaurant and eat with legends of the alumni of the team. And you take this video content and it would be posted on the team social account, team accounts, but then also it would be, basically an advertisement for that restaurant, right? And you build up a real valuable sort of meaningful content piece in a relationship with the athlete. I think there's so much that can be done in this space. We're just getting started. And people had this weird view of NIL, and is it like, now we're pros, where they're free agents, and it's dumb, because it's like, listen, this is the way it's been, now it's just transparent, and these kids deserve it. And I think there's going to be a lot of really cool partnerships, but I think that's where for Heartland Group, where we would like to go when we're working with colleges and developing content pieces. And I think the women's game is going to be really important too. And what they can do for like a team, a university like Connecticut, or even the game that what we saw the numbers in March Madness, and really being able to help elevate the women's game. They should be already, but there's some unique pieces that you can do to really kind of celebrate that style game, and the brand partnerships that could be more focused on women. So I would look for those two things in those meaningful ways of developing, the partnership with players. And a third thing I will say that I really am excited about is the schools potentially building out these content areas for the student athletes. So, a podcast studio, right? Or maybe it's a video studio where the players specifically can own the content, and it could, again, this is another sponsorship space, right? But like if Lowe's sponsors, Oklahoma's podcast studio, and it's a live studio where the student athletes are the ones that are creating the content, producing the content, because let's be honest, they're all not going to go to the NFL. They're all not going to go to the NBA. they're all not going to go to the WNBA. But then this immediately gets them into a space that's not necessarily going to be, because there's only going to be so many that can also be a color commentator or a broadcaster or play-by-play on the networks. Those are really, really hard jobs, even if you're a former athlete. So, what we're seeing with Pat McAfee, who says, the next one at Oklahoma couldn't be another personality or another person who may not make it to that level, but has tremendous talent behind the microphone or in front of the camera that would be able to do that, get paid for it, and have that content studio space. So I am super excited about NIL. It's one of the things that I can't believe we're actually seeing it in my lifetime. And I can't wait to do more work in it and partner up with either the student athletes or the colleges themselves to help. Again, our role would be collaborate with the athlete, work with them as a creative director, and give them the fuel they need from a content perspective. And this is a space that we'll see grow and hopefully go beyond just that transactional kind of situation that we're seeing right now.
Totally. No doubt. And we are certainly in the first quarter of this NIL space, and it's going to be exciting to watch it continue to develop in the months and years to come. All right, last one for you, Jonah, before we get to your shout-outs. This will be a tough one, but I'm going to answer it. What's going to happen first? Next, I guess. So what's going to happen next? Will the Knicks win an NBA championship, or will Kansas football win a Big 12 title?
No. No. Okay. Here, I will say this. Kansas football has been dreadful for quite some time. I was actually there, which is remarkable. I was there the year they went to the Orange Bowl.
The Mark Mangino era.
The Mark Mangino era, which was, just wild if you really think about it. But I digress. I won't go down that rabbit hole. But I say that Kansas will win a Big 12 title before the Knicks win the championship. I think it's going to be harder for the Knicks to kind of, as you're seeing this year, they're struggling. They thought they had some momentum last season, but they really got to get a superstar player that they draft. I don't think it's going to come through free agency. So then you're looking at, they got to be a lottery team for some years, and they got to hit the guy. They got to be in a Golden State situation where they nail a couple players in the draft that are going to be legit superstars. So I think that's going to be a challenge, and that's going to take some time. With the Big 12 changing and the bigger schools with a lot of money and a lot of fandom and who have been national powerhouses before, Texas, Oklahoma leaving the conference, I think that might leave the door open for Kansas and maybe catching some momentum with the teams they have this year, seeing them get some better recruits. So, boy, that is what I'm going to say. It's tough to even, get the words out of my mouth. But yeah, I think Kansas football wins a Big 12 title before the Knicks win an NBA championship.
There we go. Hey, Lance Leipold wins wherever he goes. So I like your chances.
Yeah. Let's see where it goes. Man, it'd be great because, listen, basketball is what I grew up playing. I love it, but my friends and we've gone on road trips to the SEC schools, and there is nothing like being at a big football school and watching one of those games. And we went to an Ole Miss game, and it was just absolutely mind blowing. And Ole Miss isn't even the best team in the SEC, so it shows you what that's all about. So if Kansas could build something with that and the college basketball program, it would be pretty special.
Hell yeah. We'll keep an eye on our young Rock Chalk Jayhawk. It'll happen one of these days in our lifetime. We can only hope. All right, Jonah, nothing but net in our jump shots segment with you. Now your chance to take over the podcast and just tell us your social media all-star to follow. It can be whatever platform. Just tell us who they are and why they're worth following.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm going to do a shameless plug and hit up my partner, Keith Steckler. I think you should give him a follow. He
Very
does.
Nice.
It won't just be the content that we're creating, but he does do some trends sort of similar to kind of what you do on his Twitter account. And he started this hashtag airport living. I don't know if you've seen that. It's just so funny because I see it. I'm like, why do you have this? And I think he just gets a crack at it. But it's really actually very creative because you can just see like some of the nightmare stories of people traveling and when they travel a lot and what they go through. So it's an easy handle to follow at KEITHS at Keith's. And he's my partner at Heartland and obviously a great friend. So I give him a shout out. He's the guy to follow. And one of my favorite follows, another follow, if you're into gambling too, that's one of the things that I've been into. But if you follow Warren Sharp on Twitter, if you're into sports and gambling, his insights into that world, even if you're not a gambling fiend, he really has an inside track into kind of the X's and O's in football that you'll get beyond kind of the shows on ESPN and Fox. So give those two a try.
I like it. Some good ones there. Yeah, I definitely enjoy Keith's Airport Living. It cracks me up every time.
Yeah.
Right, how about you, Jonah? Where can we find you as well as all things Heartland on digital and social media?
Yeah, at Jonah Ballow, JONAHBALLOW, at Jonah Ballow. That's my handle on Twitter and Instagram. So hit me up there. I do a lot of, sometimes it'll be sports, sometimes it'll be MMA, and you'll be annoyed by it on a pay-per-view night. But I share a lot of content of what we're doing at Heartland, which is at Heartland Group, HEARTLENT Group, Heartland Group, and give us a follow there or at heartland.com. And again, we're always looking for creators out there too. If you're doing stuff in your space and you want to collaborate with us, we're open to that. And clients who want to talk to us, we're always willing to brainstorm. So, this is a fun medium. I love doing the podcasting. We have one too. It's we need to be doing that podcast. We'll have to get you on our podcast now. So we'll have to return the favor. Okay.
No, I think people probably know me, know that I think highly of Heartland and what you guys are doing, what you guys have done. And do check out that podcast. We need to be doing that. It's literally, that's the name of the podcast. We need to be doing that. And they have some great guests on there and great conversations as well. But Jonah, can't not thank you enough for your time and insight today. Just full of wisdom. I learned a ton. I know our listeners will have as well. And just thank you again for coming on the show.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much, Neil. Really appreciate your work as well. And it was great catching up, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much again to Jonah Ballow, founder and head of content strategy and production at Heartland Group. Just so much fun, so stimulating being able to talk to him, pick his brain, learn from him. Just so awesome hearing his stories, his insights, and really gets you thinking in a lot of ways. But that'll do it for this episode of the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. Again, thank you for listening. I'm your host, Neil Horowitz. You can find me on Twitter at NJH287. We'd love to hear from you. Hit me up on LinkedIn as well. I'll probably post more content. Visit the website, dsmsports.net, for more episodes and content. And, of course, check out the podcast on whichever podcast platform that you prefer. Until next time, this is Neil Horowitz signing off for the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast.